Good morning, everybody. My name is Larcine. I'm a grateful member of Al-Anon. And I want to thank you guys so much for having me, Ben for the invitation to get to be here, and Janice for being such a great hostess. You know, it still blows my mom is 92 years old, and she goes, "You're going to get in a car with a complete stranger you don't even know?" I mean, it just always, I remind her I'm 70 now and not 7, but Janice has been just absolutely wonderful, and I want to thank her so much. And, you know, and all the speakers that you have here this weekend are, you know, I know so many of them, and, you know, and I have such a place in my heart for them. I'm just honored to get to be here. And, you know, and Barkley, what an amazing announcer. I want you to know we do have a program in Al-Anon for people who like to give people a lot of instruction. So you're welcome to come after this conference is over, so you don't have that lingering thing going on anymore. Anyway, it's always, I always get nervous, you know, being the only Al-Anon speaker at an AA function. You know, I liken it to being the corpse at an Irish wake. No one expects you to say much, but they can't have the party without you. So, here I am, you know. You know, and I'm sorry, you know, but we can't all be alcoholics, okay? I mean, it's just the way it is. I mean, you know, I like to, but I just can't get past the drinking part. Other than that, I would absolutely love to be here, and I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, it saved the life of my husband. It saves the life of my son. You know, if there's nothing else I can say to you today, it's how grateful I am to AA for doing that, because you really saved the life of two really, really great people. And let them continue to be in my life. And I'm a little weepy now because I'm still struggling. My husband passed away a year and a half ago, and it's been a real hard ride. We were married 49 years, and I just miss him. I just miss him. But, you know, I know what to do here because I know what works here. And I know it works here because it's worked for me, you know, for the 43 plus years that I've been in Al-Anon. I know what the answers are. You know, I'm just the one that struggles with, you know, why it's a one day at a time program, because that's just really what it is. You just got to do it one day at a time. And it's not that hard to do. And it really is the answer to all my problems. You know, so I pray a lot. And I remember when I walk in the morning, I walk in the afternoon. That's my prayer and meditation time. And not so long ago, I was walking, and the thought came to my mind, because there's many thoughts that come to my mind. You know, I read somewhere that you have like 10 or 12,000 thoughts a day, some ridiculous, and none of them are, they're all like, you're going to die. And that's the joy of being an Al-Anon. And you know, and the thought came to me, you know what? You're never going to be happy again. Freaked me out. And because it freaked me out, I said out loud, oh my God, I'm never going to be happy again. Now, mind you, I wasn't praying, but I pray so much that God thought I was praying, because I said, oh my God, because then the next thing I heard in my mind, and I know God's talking to me when he always says my name, because he always says Larcine. That's the thought, and I always know it's the God talking to me. And God said, Larcine, you're just going to have to find a different happy. You know, because there's always an answer here. There is just always an answer here. It's just whether or not I'm willing to find a different happy. You know, and I want to stick my heels in the ground and go, no, I can't be, and all that, because that's all the garbage. How I'm affected by the family disease of alcoholism always wants to keep you down, always wants to keep you down, always wants you to think that there's not a solution, and there always is a solution here. You know, so right now I'm just on the journey of trying to find a different happy. And being with you guys is happy. I can't help it. You guys are just like, you just like to laugh about everything. I don't care how disastrous it is or whatever. The worse the story is, ho, 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 you know, it's just like, what the heck? And for that, I am very grateful. So anyway, we just got a little bit of time, so I'm just going to do what I do here and, you know, and let you know I'm the oldest of 4 kids. Unlike Katie, I was in the Army. My dad was a master sergeant, so, and I'm the firstborn, so I've always had rank, corporal, whatever, but I've just, that's just the way that it was. My dad ran his family just like he did his platoon in the Army. We had little Army bunk beds. We had footlockers at the end of our bunk beds. We had Army blankets on our bunk beds, and, my dad would come in and do room inspection and flip a quarter on the bed, and then he would salute me and I would salute him, and he would even take me to the platoons and show them how his 5-year-old daughter could make a better bed than they could, and I'm still very, very proud about that. But anyway, but I just grew up with a lot of discipline, a lot of stuff, but my dad was an alcoholic, and I had no idea my dad was an alcoholic. It's not like you're born and you get a brochure that says, hey, your dad's an alcoholic, and this is going to explain a lot of stuff, the weirdo stuff that's going on in your house. But, and like I said, I didn't know he was an alcoholic, but I tell you what I did know is that there was something wrong. I just sensed it as a little tiny kid. I knew there was something wrong. And my next thing was, how can I fix this? How the family is affected by the disease of alcoholism, because if I'm a good enough girl, if I get, good grades, if I make my dad laugh, what can I do to make this situation better? So I was just brought into this just right out of the gate, just going on. And like I said, and I grew up with a lot of discipline. It works for me. I like it. I like knowing what you want me to do and how you want me to do it. It's all great. My husband joked that I came out of the womb carrying a clipboard and wearing an armband. And he's not too far off the mark, because when I was in school, I was always cafeteria monitor, playground monitor, room monitor. And why? Because the teacher knew that if anybody misbehaved, I would write down their name and report them. It is a gift that God has given me as far as I'm concerned, and, you take whatever gifts you get, but, and there's a place for all of that. But but when you take these gifts that you have and then you apply the family disease of alcoholism, they morph into something that they were never meant to be. And that's just been my experience. And, when I was new in Al-Anon, I went to lots and lots of open meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says in our Al-Anon literature that you should learn all you can about the disease of alcoholism. And I know no better place to learn that than in open meetings of AA. And I remember being at one of my very first AA speaker meetings, and the AA speaker that night, he talked about alcoholism, the family disease. And he described alcoholism, the family disease, as like having a rhinoceros in your living room, but everybody pretends it's a coffee table. And boy, if I have to describe the house that I grew up in, that's the house that I grew up in. Because we never talked about anything. It was just like, we'd be sitting at the dinner table, and my mom would know my dad was going to have one of his alcoholic explosions. And that wasn't hard because he had an explosion every night. It's just what happened. But my mom would, right away, as soon as we sat down to dinner, she'd start shaking her head and blinking, doing this kind of a thing, which is a warning. If you grew up in an alcoholic home, you know what I'm talking about. It's a warning. Nobody talk. Nobody move. Because you're just hoping that if nobody does anything, it won't happen. But somebody does some minor infraction, they scrape a knife on a plate or some stupid thing, and my dad goes ballistic, and everybody gets a beating, dinner goes flying. We all have to go to bed, 5 o'clock, the evening, my mom, the kids, the dog, just how it goes down in our house. And then the next morning, I'd go down, creeping down the hallway to go into the kitchen to have breakfast before I went to school. And there'd be my dad at the breakfast table having his breakfast beer. And you'd walk in and be, good morning, what do you want for breakfast? And no one ever said, gee whiz, Dad, what was that about last night? Gee whiz, how come you had to break everything and hit everybody? Because day after day after day, our rhinoceros turned back into a coffee table. And to me, that's the hope that the Al-Anon, that the family has, is just that you hope today will be different. There's no reason for you to think it will be, but boy, you got to hang on to some kind of hope, because you don't know what else to do. You just don't know what else to do. And I'm just going to cut to the chase with my dad. My dad ended up dying when he was 55 years old. He died the death that they talk about in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, total insanity and death. I can't even tell you the last words my dad said to me, because they were so vile and so vulgar. And I always say the last words my dad said to me, when in reality what I know today, because those are the last words my dad's alcoholism said before it took the life of yet one more person. It wasn't enough for alcoholism to kill my dad. It had to hurt the family just as much as it possibly could, because that's what that is all about. And so anyway, when my dad died, My dad died in 1981, and I started coming to Al-Anon in 1981. I started coming in June, and my dad died in October. So June to October, I'd only been coming to Al-Anon, but for a few months I wasn't, loving and forgiving, and none of that good stuff was happening yet. I was still pretty much scoping it out. But I was coming to Al-Anon. I had a sponsor. I was working the steps, going to meetings, doing the things that you guys were telling me to do. But, and what ended up happening, I remember when my dad died, the nurses coming out telling us, me and my sisters, that my dad had passed away. And I'd like to tell you we were sad, but we were not. My sisters and I were like, ding dong, the witch is dead, da, da, da. And I don't tell you this story because I'm proud of it. I tell you this story because this is how alcoholism affected our family. That you would rather see somebody die than just have to live in that reign of terror anymore. I mean, to us, that was the solution. And we were happy about it. And, but what I got to learn from that experience as time went on is the only thing that happened that day was that the alcoholic died. But the family disease of alcoholism was alive and well in me and my sisters because of how we had been affected by this. And I know this because, now my dad's dead, I'm in Al-Anon, I'm doing the deal here, but boy, I'd be somewhere. And if anybody ever so much as talked to me in that tone of voice that my dad used to use, boy, the hair on the back of my neck would go up, and I would get so angry all over again. And I always tell alcoholics, that incomprehensible, pitiful, whatever all that is not just reserved for the alcoholic. Because if you've ever been at a school function and you're getting an award and your drunken dad shows up, I'll tell you that's exactly what that feels like. But anyway, if somebody would just, I'd have that tone of voice, I would just get so angry. And I would go home. And I don't know how you guys are, but when I'm really angry and pissed off, I like to take that home and share it with my husband and my children and the people that I love and care about the most, because isn't that the family disease of alcoholism? You got to spread it around, and if you can get the neighbors involved, extra points, it's just the ridiculousness of it. Why we just want to make everybody go, everybody, come on, I love the line in the book about not the manufacturer of misery. Holy crap, that's what I do for a living. I know I was not supposed to do that. And I didn't want to be doing that because I was going to Al-Anon and I had a sponsor and I heard what you guys were sharing at the meeting and I wanted desperately to be that person, to have recovery. But I just was like, I was going nuts behind that, and I remember going to my first sponsor, Jeannie, and just going, I'm doing everything you tell me and I'm still yelling at my family. I'm still hitting my kids, not anything I'm proud of. Why? What am I doing wrong? And she assured me that I wasn't doing anything wrong. You're coming to the meetings, you're working the steps to the best of your ability. She says, except for one thing, Larcine, and that's that you always want to focus on the problem. And Al-Anon isn't about the problem. Al-Anon is about the solution. So we have to find a solution for you. So she says, I'm going to give you an assignment, you're not going to like it. And she always prefaced it with, and you're not going to like it. Because I have never liked one stupid weenie thing they have ever told me to do in Al-Anon. Because, you bring your big problems to Al-Anon and you know what they say? Easy does it. Let go and let God, it's like, what? You're out of, and in my mind, it was like, my problems are so big, I am freaking you people out. You're just reading the crap on the walls. You don't even know what to say to me. Just always making it so much bigger than what it needs to be. And I come by that naturally. My husband always used to say to me, Larcine, why do you make a big deal out of everything? Because I grew up in a house where we made a big deal out of everything. That's what I know how to do. No matter what minor thing would happen, it became a big deal. And I did not know how to turn that stuff off. And so she said she's going to give me this assignment, and this assignment is that I was supposed to think up a good thing my dad has done for me. And my initial reaction is, you are out of your flaming mind. You know how I grew up with this dad. You know the things he did, and the abuse, physical, and then the verbal abuse, just all of that, and you want me to think up a good thing my dad has done for me when my very first remembrance on the face of this planet is fear. It's the first thing I remember, fear at my dad's hands, and I'm supposed to think up a good thing he did for me. When I get the head bobbing thing going on, I'm gone, and stuff. And then I told her, and you can't make me, because that's my favorite thing to say. And and I remember her saying to me, Larcine, I've never made you do anything. All I've ever asked you, and all Al-Anon ever asked you to do, is just to be willing to do something different. and that's up to you. And so I don't know how long it took me, or whatever, but, I became willing, and because I remember hearing at one of my very first meetings that if you're not willing to do something different, then how is anything ever going to change? And for whatever reason, that's always made sense to me. It still does to this day. I have to have some willingness if I want things to be different. So again, I don't know how long it was, a week or 2 weeks. I went home willing. I remember that my dad taught me how to drive. And if you're going to live in Southern California, marry an alcoholic of your own, it's just a skill you got to have, okay? If you're going to track those suckers down, and I'm talking tracking alcoholics down, no cell phone, no GPS, we didn't have any of that good stuff. You just had to find people that did not want to be found. And we are good at it, but at any rate, and I remember going to Jeannie thinking this is not going to be a good enough answer for her, and, but I said, I thought up a good thing my dad has done for me, and Jeannie was a clapper, which irritated me. Every time I would do something right, she'd go, she hardly ever did that. Most of the time she just chisted me, But that day I got this, and in all fairness, it was my rookie year in Al-Anon. I didn't know when your sponsor gave you an assignment there would be part 2, And part 2 is the action. Part 2 is what are you going to do to make this be different now? What are you going to do so you can find a solution, so you can have a life that's happy, joyous, and free? What Al-Anon gives me day after day is the shot at a good life, but I'm the person that's got to take the shot. Here's the tools. Here's the things you can do. Are you going to take the shot or not take the shot? And so she says, now whenever you think about whatever happened, whatever embarrassment, whatever humiliation, whatever beating you took, she goes, I just want you to replace this negative thought with this positive one that he taught you how to drive. And then I want you to think about your dad dying at the age of 55. Not only did he die a relatively young man from the disease of alcoholism, he also died with all of his children being grateful he was dead. And you're a parent, you have children. Do you want that to happen to you? Do you think your dad wanted that to happen to him? Or maybe, just maybe, can you accept the fact that he was a sick alcoholic? Did you ever think that maybe he just loved you as much as his alcoholism would allow him to? Can you ask anybody to love you more than they're capable of doing? Give you more than they have to give? And again, there's things I never ever thought of, just like, when Katie was talking about, I never think about what that other person is going through or doing whatever. It never occurred to me that my dad didn't want to do those things, because again, when you've been the constant victim your whole entire life, because that's the lie that the disease wants you to think. It wants you to think there are no choices, that there are no solutions, and there always are. Love is the answer in Al-Anon. It always has been. And sometimes it's difficult to find it, but it is there. It is absolutely, positively there. And I don't mean to tell you that I, grew up with this hellacious dad who liked to beat us and made us feel bad about being girls and all the other crap that went down. And then I did this weenie assignment in Al-Anon, and now it's rainbows and butterflies out my butt all the time. That is not what happened at all. What my sponsor gave me that day that I cherish to this day is she gave me the gift of forgiveness. We have a great book, How Al-Anon Works, and there's a beautiful page and a half there on forgiveness, and there's one line in there that just hit me in between the eyes, and it just says, forgiveness is no favor, we do it for nobody but ourselves. And I thought if I was forgiven my dad, again, my thinking, that I was letting him off the hook. And I wasn't going to let him off the hook because it wasn't right. And Al-Anon has never told me that any of that was right. What Al-Anon has taught me is it's just what was. Now what are you going to do? You want to find a solution, or you want to live in the problem? Because when I was able to forgive my dad, guess what? I was able to have a shot at a good life. I was able not to take it out on my kids and the neighbors and everything else that goes on. That's what gets to happen here. And I really do believe, that my dad wanted to have a different thing. He just wasn't able to get there. It's not for me to judge how or why, or, it's just the way that it was. Now what am I going to do? Just as a little side note, when my dad died, he was cremated, and my dad was a lifer in the Army. My dad was a World War II veteran, a Korean War veteran. a decorated war veteran. He was a Purple Heart recipient. He was a really good soldier. And the Army brought me like his ashes and his flag and all this other kind of stuff. I happened to be home alone that day, and so they left me with his ashes. So I took his ashes and I went down to our garage, and behind my garage is my laundry room, and I took my dad's ashes there and I put them behind the washing machine, and I said, "You sit here and you think about what you did." And my dad sat there for a good long time, let me tell you. You know, every time I go down there, I do the laundry. I go, "Hey, Sarge, guess who's in charge now, Sarge?" You know, and whatever. It's a process. My sponsor approved. You know, it was just you got to do what you got to do. But anyway, when I was 17 years old, I met my husband. I should have known there was something wrong with him because my dad liked him right away, and that had like never ever happened. And I went on this date with Butch. We were with this other couple, and we went bowling first, and then he stopped at a liquor store because we were going to go back to his place and with this other couple and play this game. He stopped at a liquor store and he'd asked me what I wanted to drink. Well, I'm 17 years old. I'm a rule and regulation girl, so I proceed to tell him what the drinking laws are in the state of California, and that I am an underage minor buddy, in case you don't know. And I know he heard that day what he always heard when he doesn't want to hear what I'm saying. He heard blah, 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 blah. And he went on and got a gallon of Red Mountain wine, obviously to impress me with his wine knowledge, because I don't know nothing about nothing. And we played, and we got back to his house. We were with this other couple. We played this game. It's called Pass Out. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it or not. It's a legitimate board game. It has rules. I read them. And now I'm a rule follower. I'm a straight A student. I do all this stuff. I keep my nose clean. I do what the Sarge tells me to do. And and I don't drink because it's against the law to drink. I would never violate the law. But there's a lot of rules in when you grow up like I do, there's just a lot of rules. And sometimes your rules conflict, so you gotta pick out which rule's the most important, and so even though I don't drink because it's against the law to drink, I must also win every game I play, okay? Because that's an Army thing. You will be victorious. You will do whatever you need to be victorious. And so anyway, I drank half a glass of this god-awful wine, and I won, because that's what that was all about, because it's a drinking game, and then guess who drank all the rest of the wine? Now, I want you to know, at 17 years old, boy, I got a list about what my life is going to be like. I mean, I can't wait to get out of the house that I live in. You can cut the hate between my mom and my dad with a knife. It's just an awful place. And so I've got this list about I'm going to marry somebody, and number one on that list is I'm going to love that person. Because my parents don't love each other. What's that about? I don't get it. And then, and the second thing on that list is that person's going to love me. And then the third thing on that list is that we're going to have nothing but girl children, because my dad really disliked having girl children. And then the fourth thing on that list was no drinking. Because at 17, I know what's going on in my house. I know my dad's a drunk. I am not going to get in the same situation my mom has gotten in. And now I've gone out with Butch, and I've just had this best time of my life. It's just, I just can't wait to go out with him again, except he's in violation of rule number 4. Now how am I going to fix this? Well, I have never, I will stand toe to toe with any alcoholic when it comes to rationalization and justification. It doesn't take much. We do it, I do it to this day all the time. My sponsor used to say it's information from nowhere. I do lots of stuff, and she'd say, "Who told you that?" And I said, "Nobody. I thought it up all by myself. I thought that was good." It's not. And but again, what the family disease wants you to think, and she would say, "Larcine, that's information from nowhere. You just think crap up, it lands in your head, becomes fact for you, and you act upon it, and that's why things are as messed up as they are." And so and that's how I was that night. It was like, he's in violation of rule number 4. How can I go out with him again? Didn't take me long. Information landed here, became fact for me. Because you see, when my husband's drinking, he just wants to hug you and kiss you and tell you how pretty you are. When my dad's drinking, he wants to hit you and yell at you. But see, Butch just wants to kiss you and love you. And I can work with that, okay? Because that has only, the potential that only we can see in you. And so, and that's how it got for me to be okay for, because again, I'll just make it fit. That's what we do. We just make it fit. Whether it's right or wrong, we'll just make it fit. And I pretty much exclusively started going out. Butch and I started dating exclusively at that point. It was hard for me to date him, basically because he couldn't remember my name. But you can't let a little thing like that stop you from going out with an alcoholic, right? That should be the hardest thing, right? And I know my name is weird because it is. And my dad, like I said, he didn't like having girl children. And when I was born, I was supposed to be Lawrence Edmund Wells Jr. That was it. There was no girl name picked out. And as my dad would tell me the story, you were a girl, broke my heart. My dad literally left for 2 days. That's how mad he was at my mother. And, but 2 days later when he came back, he said, because I was firstborn, he said he named me Larcine because it's the name of a town in Scotland. And that, because he couldn't name me after him, and because I was firstborn, I got this special name, and I should always be proud of it. Because to know my dad is to know how proud he was of his Scottish heritage. And I've been taught that since a little kid, so I've always been really proud of it. Now fast forward, I've done the whole forgiveness thing with my dad, and I got curious again about, Larcine, Scotland, and so again, no Google, no computers. If you wanted information, you had to go to a room called the library to go find it. So I go to the library to look up Larcine, Scotland. We just have a little weenie library, just a small one, but of course I could find nothing on it. So I went to the reference librarian and asked her to find out what she could about it. She said, "What do you know?" I said, "It's the name of a town in Scotland." That's all I got. She goes, "Okay, come back in a few weeks and we'll see what we find out." And I remember going back to the library. I remember the manila envelope. I remember pulling out a white piece of paper, one line across the top. No such place as Larcine, Scotland. And I am pissed off because I've done the whole forgiveness, Al-Anon BS, and then here's my dad. One more time I fell for it, and I am just like losing my mind, okay? And then we have this friend, he goes to Scotland all the time because he's a big golfer. It's like the golf mecca of the universe or something. He goes, "You know what? Maybe there was Larcine, Scotland, like it's an old country, maybe there was Larcine, Scotland, like, hundreds, thousands of years ago. Let me ask my friends in Scotland, if they've ever heard of Larcine, Scotland." He comes back 2 weeks later, and no one in Scotland has ever heard of Larcine, Scotland. And so I am pissed. Bite me, Dad. I'm going to change my name. I am just angry beyond belief. And as in our community, word gets out that you're having a problem. Everybody gets to know about it. And so this AA guy walks up to me at the big AA Saturday night speaker meeting, and he goes, "Larcine, you're not going to believe this, but I found out that Larcine is a Scottish word." I go, "You're kidding me." He goes, "No, it is Scottish for father was drunk when daughter was born, so daughter got a weird name." And now I knew the minute he told me that it wasn't true, okay? I mean, I'm blonde, but I'm not that blonde. But what he went on to say to me is, "You know what, Larcine, I don't know," he goes, "I'm here to tell you that I'm alcoholic like your dad was alcoholic." And I don't know if he read it wrong, spelt it wrong. I don't know what the heck happened. But he goes, "But I want you to know that when your dad named you Larcine, he believed it was the name of a town in Scotland. And just because it's not wrapped the way that you want it to be wrapped doesn't make it any less of a gift." See, even left to my own devices, I'll be mad at you for it. I'll blame you because once again, I'm just looking about how it affects me. I'm not thinking about what you were doing or what was going on there. And, and it's not, and it's not like he told me that and I bought it hook, line, and sinker that night, but I really went home and I thought about it and I prayed about it, and I really do not believe that my dad went to all that trouble to give me a name just so he could hurt me later on. I believe that, that's what he thought that it was. And then eventually I ended up getting my license plates with Larcine, 7 letters. It fits perfectly on there. It's on my car to this day. And then several years back, my husband got me license plate holders that say it's the name of a town in Scotland. And, because you guys are just so funny. You guys have such a great sense of humor. And I am not kidding. So far, I've had 2 total strangers come up to me and tell me they have been there, okay? I mean, it's just crazy. Just crazy. You cannot make this stuff up, as was said earlier. But at any rate, Butch and I started dating, pretty much exclusively from that. And I want you to know right out of the gate, my husband has always been probably the most honest person I know on the face of this planet, even drinking. He's just not a guy that lies to you. He was just always up front. This is who I am. This is the drinks. I like to drink like this. I like to use drugs. I don't like to work. He was really clear on all of it. And, but not anything I couldn't fix. Not anything I knew I couldn't fix. And, and what ended up happening is after we dated for a couple of years, I ended up getting pregnant. And I don't care if it's a big deal for you. 1974, it was a big, big deal for me. And then later on, when our life got really, really bad behind my husband's drinking and using, I just thought it was because God was punishing me because I'd broken the big rule and all that kind of stuff. And I used to say that sob story at Al-Anon meeting, and my friend Crazy Jean walked up to me one time and he goes, Larcine, if you're going to screw around and not use any birth control, you might just get pregnant. Just a fact of life. But if you want to blame God, because that's all I know how to do is blame people. But again, I'm not solution-oriented. I'm whose fault it is, who started it. That's what I'm all over about. Somebody's got to take responsibility for the things that go wrong, and it's not going to be me. Again, how I am affected by the family disease of alcoholism. Al-Anon and AA are just all about the truth. Just about the truth. You can deal with the truth. The truth has a solution. But if you want to keep living in the lie about who did what and blah, 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 just keep dragging it around. Just a chain that just gets longer and heavier to carry. But anyway, I never talked much to Butch about his drinking until the day after we got married. And the day after we got married, I sat him in the kitchen chair and I told him the rules and the regulations. And this is how this is going down, buddy. Babysitter once a month and you can party once a month. Other than that, you're working, you're bringing me home the paycheck. Do you understand? I remember him in the kitchen chair doing this, affirmative. And, what I know today, he was just so drunk and loaded, his head was just doing this thing, and I know that because day 3 of our marriage, guess who does not come home all night long? This is a huge violation of the rules and regulations that I have sat down. And I am very proud to tell you guys that my husband begged for the silent treatment, begged for it. He never got it, not one time, boy. I was just like a little dog when you walk in the room, just, and cursing. I don't even know where I learned this language from. But again, information from nowhere. Lance here becomes fact for me because I'm sure if I curse with the right mothers and effers in the right order that he'll have some spiritual awakening, or whatever. And just the insanity, the absolute crazy insanity, that goes along with that. And, nobody was more shocked about it than me. And I want you to know absolutely positively the driving force behind Butch and I getting married was the birth of our son. There's no doubt about it. And, but I want you to know that Butch and I got married in a church and we got married in front of a minister. And I believe we were as sincere as any two people were. He was sober that day. I loved him, and I know he loved me. And we wanted to honor those vows. We wanted to love each other and cherish each other and take care of each other and do all those things. But what he didn't know and I didn't know was it wasn't just he and I that got married that day. It was also the family disease of alcoholism. And I'm here to tell you the family disease of alcoholism doesn't love or cherish anything or anyone. It means to destroy your family, and it'll do so through the alcoholic, but I'm here to tell you from my experience it'll equally do so through the non-drinking member of the family and how I am affected by the disease of alcoholism. Because that's just where it took off for us. It's just where it took off for us. And I was just trying to do all the things that I could do, counting his drinks, supervising his drinks. It was just all that craziness and insanity that just went on and on and on. And we were going to have a family reunion, his family reunion. He's 1 of 9. The only alcoholic out of the bunch, lucky me. And, and I make him raise his right hand and promise me that he will be sober that day. And he does, because he means to be. So we can go. And guess what? That day comes, and guess who's so drunk and so loaded he can't even stand up. And I am so angry, because that's all I know how to do is just get angry. And I'm here to tell you, no matter how drunk or blacked out, my husband was a blackout drinker, no matter how drunk or blacked out he was, he never raised a hand to hit me, because he's not that guy. He just isn't. But that day I was hitting him in the chest, egging him to just, let's just take it to the next level, because all I know how to do is just keep pushing harder, even if it's in the wrong direction. And all of a sudden I became very conscious, and at this point now we have 2 little boys, and I look down and my sons are on either side of me, and they're pulling on my pant legs, little big tears coming down their little faces, and it's, Mommy, please stop yelling at Daddy. And I would like to tell you that I had a moment of clarity then, but I did not. I started yelling at those little kids. How dare they tell me to stop yelling at their dad when he's the reason our life is the piece of crap that it is. And by the time I get done screaming at these little boys, I watch my drunken husband walk out the front door. And I, the sober mother, say to the drunken dad, "Where do you think you're going?" And the drunk dad turns to the sober mom and says, "I'm leaving because we're upsetting the kids." And again, I don't tell you this story because I'm proud of it. I tell you this story because this is how I'm affected by the disease of alcoholism. And I can't even see my own behavior because I'm constantly blaming him for what's going on in our life. And I think I'm protecting my kids, and stuff like that. They never needed protection from their dad, but boy, did they need protection from their mom. They were always good with their dad. I mean, Butch just liked to get drunk and pass out. I shared that one time, and Howard P. was sitting next to him and said, "I don't think that's too much to ask for." But it was more than I could do for him. But they were always good around Butch. Butch would be passed out on the floor, whatever, and the boys they'd be fine. They'd build Tinker Toy bridges over him and tie Tonka trucks to him and pretend he was Gulliver, they would just, whatever, but I was the screaming, hurry, 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 yell, 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 just all that kind of crap, and somewhere in all that insanity, I went to my very first Al-Anon meeting, and I remember being at that meeting, and they had all their stupid literature, alcoholism, a merry-go-round named denial. It's all kinds of weird stuff, but when I was sitting in that front row, because all I wanted you guys to tell me how to fix him. Tell me how to fix him. And they didn't want to do that. They wanted to tell me what I could do for myself and my children. And I didn't want to hear it because there's nothing wrong with me. You fix him and I'll be okay. Yet when I was sitting in that front row, Larcine, do you want your life to be different? Oh my God, do I want my life to be different? Larcine, what are you willing to do about it? Nothing, because it's not my fault. Again, how I'm affected by the disease of alcoholism. Somebody's got to take the rap for it, and it's not going to be me. And so, and back I go out into it again. And then what ended up happening is Butch got arrested for drunk driving. No big deal. He got arrested all the time for drunk driving. It's just, because this is back in the 70s. You pay a lawyer $500, it's reckless, and you're on your merry way again. But this particular night, he had a spiritual awakening in a jail cell, and that's his thing. And I believe God was working in his life. I don't know that God was necessarily working in mine. But I remember picking him up from jail. I never had to bail him out. They always let him go on his own recognizance. He's a nice guy. And I didn't say anything, and this is how I know God was working in Butch's life, because I didn't say anything. And believe you me, it takes a power greater than anything in the universe to keep my mouth shut. But I said nothing. And then I took him home. I think he slept it off for a couple of days, and then he came downstairs and made that understatement, "I think I have a problem." You guys are so quick on picking up on that. And, but they had just opened up this hospital program, brand spanking new, and so anyway, I heard about it. I gave him the number. And again, God working in Butch's life, because I'm the one that does everything. I did nothing. I handed him the number and I walked away. And he called this hospital, and he, had to go in there, and my husband had a long-standing Valium habit. I mean, it was not unusual for Butch to take 15 to 20 10-milligram Valiums a day. It's just what he did to function. And I had to take him to the psychiatric unit first, and I remember leaving, and just as I got to the guards were letting me out the door, he said, "Larcine, come back, and I thought because he changed his mind, and I go back, and instead he reached into his pocket, and he handed me the Valium he brought in case of emergency, and he'd never parted with a Valium in his life, so I knew something was different, and I went home and I took it because I was a flaming basket case. In all fairness, I think I slept for 26 hours on one 10-milligram Valium, but I was tired. And, and let me tell you, those weeks that he was in that hospital, if it was up to me, he'd still be there because I just liked it. They locked him up at night. They watched him. It was absolutely fabulous. And, and I would, the boys were little in kindergarten and in preschool, and to cheer them up, I would take Butch, their little paintings and stuff, to the hospital and show him. He didn't want to see it. He wanted to show me what he made in occupational therapy that day, We'd take it home, hang it on the refrigerator. Look, Daddy's sober. He's doing this stuff. And, and then after they detoxed him and all that stuff, he got introduced to the AA program, and I'm happy to tell you that my husband got sober on July the 21st, 1979, and he died with 44 years sobriety. And I am so grateful, I am just so grateful. But anyway, Butch got sober, and when he was in the program, they told me that I should go to Al-Anon. I'd already been to Al-Anon, and I knew it didn't work, and I told him, I've been there, it sucks, it doesn't work. And they said, no, you got to go to at least one meeting. So I went to a meeting, I raised my hand at the meeting. I said, I was here about 1.5 years ago, and I asked you how to get my husband sober, and you didn't tell me, and I'm not going to tell you how I got him sober now. And I really believe that. And you know what they said to me? Keep coming back. I want you to know that, because if you're ever at a meeting and you share and they tell you to keep coming back, it's because you said the most asinine, BS, stupid it's your only hope until your head pops out of your butt. That's just all they got for you, and that was my Al-Anon career. And then, but Butch, he kept going to AA and working this program, and 2 years into his sobriety, boy, I found myself as angry as I've ever been. And nobody was more shocked about that than me, because I was always sure when Butch was sober, that would fix me. When Butch was a good husband, when Butch was a good provider, that all those things would fix me. And 2 years into his sobriety, I'm just as angry as I've ever been in my life. And I remember one day I'm doing the laundry, because I'm very task-oriented. The motto in my house is, there is no fun until the chores are done. And there's always chores. There's always chores, right? And this particular day is laundry day. And I hear Butch in the living room, and he's with the boys. They're bigger, and stuff. And they're laughing, carrying on. But the minute I set foot in that living room with my laundry basket, dead silence. Because that's my gift to this family. I suck the joy right out of the room. Because that's just what I do. And I remember walking through that living room, and again, I heard God's voice, because he said, Larcine. And what he said is, Larcine, you've become your dad. And even though I was an alcoholic like my dad, I was trying to rule these people with this iron fist. So afraid if I don't ride them, stay hard on them, do these things, that they're going to slip through my fingers. And I don't think that God doesn't give you an answer, that he doesn't really give you another thing, something to go with that. Because the next thing I heard is, Larcine, this is not who you are supposed to be. And I knew for a fact it wasn't. So that's when I started coming down on not to get him sober or keep him sober. I came because I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I got my first sponsor, Jeannie, and I had her the first 9 years until she passed away. And I remember the first time I used her as a sponsor, Butch had a dead battery. And he asked me to jump it, and I did. And then he ran out of gas, which pissed him off. And he got really mad and started yelling, you know how you guys are, and, so I right back at him. He went off to work, and I went upstairs, called my sponsor, and reported his behavior, because it was bad, and it needed reporting. And when I got done telling her what happened, Jeannie said to me that I owed him an amends. And I'm like, whoa, Jeannie doesn't know how we do things in America, and she missed the who started it, which I always think is so important, and so obviously she wasn't listening, so I didn't want to say she was stupid, so I started telling her the story again, because she missed the details. And when I started telling her the story again, she stopped me cold. Don't tell me what you just told me, I already heard you. What you said was unnecessary and unkind. You owe your husband an amends. You took a bad situation and you made it worse. And she said, and please don't ever call me again and tell me what Butch did. I am not Butch's sponsor. I am Larcine's sponsor. And for what you said and did, you owe your husband an amends. And then she hung up on me. Great. And, and I'm not a procrastinator. I never am. I never have been, I follow direction. I'm a rule follower. I have no choice. I'll do what she tells me. So when Butch walked in the door that evening, I marched right up to him and I said, I'm sorry I let your shitty attitude affect me the way that it did. And I'll try and do better in the future. Now, I know that may not be the best amends you've ever heard, but I don't know that I've ever made a better amends in my entire life, okay? Because it was the first time I was willing to take direction from a sponsor who wanted me to have a life that was happy, joyous, and free. To take responsibility for what I was thinking and I was doing. For having some kind of, care about somebody else and how they might have felt. And that's what the journey is. What's Al-Anon about? It's all about the love. How grateful I am to AA and Al-Anon. It taught me how to do those things. And again, we're working our programs, we're going through life, our kids are getting bigger. I come home from an Al-Anon meeting, my youngest son is like 12 years old, and Butch tells me he has dropped acid, and I'm like freaking out, and Butch is like, it's okay, relax. He gave him a glass of milk, and he's listening to Mozart. I guess that's what you do when you drop acid. I have no idea, but it did not sound right, okay? It just did not. Bush is like, leave him alone. And no, I'm not going to leave him alone. He's 12 years old, So I end up staying up with him all night long. And apparently when you're on your very first acid trip, having your mother in your face all night long is not fun. Apparently my head was like a giant balloon or something. And anyway, and Earl didn't necessarily take off right from there, but that's where it started, And then, a few years down, he's getting expelled from school because he's selling drugs at school. I'm going toe-to-toe with the principal because he's telling me they're lying, they're framing him, they're doing all this stuff. And in Al-Anon, we have this piece of literature that says, when every good sense tells us that there is something wrong, we hide what we feel and what we know because we love you. And we don't want these things to be happening. We want to believe you. And he's my son. We're always been so close. I can't believe you would lie to me. And instead of being honest with my sponsor and my group and my Al-Anon community, how are you doing? I'm not doing good. And what I'm starting to do again? I'm yelling and screaming. I'm throwing things in my house. I'm losing it. And after one really, really particularly bad night, where I threw an ashtray across the room, missed my son's head by just inches. And I remember getting in the car, and Carol's my sponsor at that point, and driving over to Carol and going, how am I supposed to be happy, joyous, and free when I have a kid who could die from this disease? And I'll never forget what she said to me, because she says, Larcine, if you're not happy, joyous, and free, then you show that kid no hope. And that is your responsibility. That's just really what it is. And she says, and you get to love that kid unconditionally. And then she made me look up unconditional in the dictionary. And you know what it says? No conditions. It's kind of clear, Because she says there's nothing that kid's ever going to say or do that's going to make you, not love him. But unacceptable behavior is unacceptable behavior. And we had a row to go with that kid. We had our South Bay roundup, and it was a great roundup. It's our local roundup, much like this, and all your friends are there, and all the speakers are great, and how, serenity's like coming out of every orifice of your body. And I come home on Sunday, and I'm very disciplined still to this day. I got my exercise program. I'm on this treadmill at that time, so I missed all my 3 days of treadmill, so now I got to make up 3 days of treadmill in 10 minutes, but I will do it. And I go out there, and next to my treadmill is my son's weight bench. She's 19 years old. There's all kinds of crap going on in this kid's life at this point. And I find a driver's license. It's a woman's driver's license. It has information. I love information, and her birth date's on there, and she lives in Glendora, California. And I instantly decide information from nowhere, in Al-Anon at this point, 15, 16 years. And I instantly decide she has been in my house. She's 32 years old. She has had sex with my 19-year-old son. She is married, has two, or she wants to marry him, has 2 kids, and call me mom. I am all over this story, okay? I take the driver's license in, I show it to Butch, and nothing, because the man has no imagination whatsoever. And I tell him what I think happened, and he's like, you are out of your mind, call Carol. So I call Carol, and Carol rarely gives me direction, but that day she told me to shut up. She goes, there's enough crap going on in that kid's life, Larcine. I know there's some hard stuff going down right now. She says, but you know what? It takes just as much effort to pray for him as it does for you to think up more garbage and live in this fear and spread that around your family. Why do you want to do that? Just pray for him. And I end my conversations as I often do to never mind, because I know, and that's what I've always got to remember. I know a lot, but am I doing it? There's a big, big difference between knowing and doing, and it's tricky sometimes. I got to remember to do it, and so I was able to start doing it. And then, a couple days later, Earl walks in with this driver's license, and he says, hey, Mom, what do you do when you find a driver's license? Now, I don't tell him what I do when I find a driver's license, because it's a very, very, very bad example. Somebody going to meetings, working the steps, blah, 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 blah. And Earl just had a road to go, and, eventually we had to ask him to leave our home because our home was a sober place and he wasn't being sober. And the things he was bringing in and doing in our house were not acceptable to us. And let me tell you, no mother feels like a black belt Al-Anon when she has to ask a child that she loves to leave their home. But the behavior was unacceptable, and that's just the way that it went. But, the times that I did get, I had to tell Earl he couldn't come home, if he wasn't sober because it was too painful for me. Just too painful for me. I remember one Thanksgiving he came, he stayed for all of 10 minutes. Because of Al-Anon, I love my son unconditionally, and I got to say thank you for coming. And we love you, and we're here for you. But he had to do what he had to do, And Butch got sober at 32. It was my hope that Earl would get sober at 32. He'd been going to AA meetings since he's frickin' 3 years old. I asked him, what did you learn in AA? He said, I learned how not to get caught. Because they hear what they want to hear, And, but anyway, when he was 36, he turned himself in. And I'm ever going to be ever so grateful. We were supposed to go to this thing, and I was going to cancel, because Earl, he talked to his dad, and, he got a big book, and Butch gave him a big book and a meeting directory, and I'm just, what's the matter with you? Let's just take him ourselves, And he says, no, Larcine, if he's going to get sober, he's got to do this on his own. And this very first weekend of sobriety, we were supposed to go to a family thing, and I wanted to cancel, and Butch says, no, we're going. And Earl ended up going to that big Saturday night speaker meeting. And when he got there, he looked in the room. Mind you, this is like his first meeting. And he knew a lot of people because they'd known him since he's a little kid, and it freaked him out, and he went to go walk away. And just as he got to the parking lot, there was this lady, she just said, is this where the AA meeting is? He goes, yeah. And then then she goes, well, I'm from out of town. I'm here visiting my sister. I'm going home tomorrow, but I thought I'd catch an AA meeting. And Earl goes, yeah, it's right in there. And then he said, she stuck out her arm and said, will you take me in, please? And I mean, this is where God is working, and I'd like to, we're really big about saying, but for the grace of God. I think it's but for the acceptance of God's grace. How many times do people put out their hand to help you? That's God's grace. It's around us all the time. It's just whether or not you want to recognize that. And at that moment, he recognized it and he walked in. And he's been sober ever since. He had 11 years. He'll have 12 years this August. And I'm, again, so grateful. Just before, Butch always would call me whenever I was out of town to go talk, and he'd say, give him hell, tell the truth, all that other kind of stuff. And, and that's been the hardest part for me. And my son's in Germany right now on vacation. And he called me just before I came up here, and he says, Mom, tell the truth and give him hell. Because that's what God does for us over and over and over again. If you just let it happen. Just look for the truth. The truth will set you free. All these simple things that get said here are absolutely, positively the truth. I have to find a different happy, and I'm working on it. And, but every night I still get on my knees, and I thank God. I thank God that I got to be married to such a wonderful guy, that we got to have such a good life. I am well aware of the fact, how blessed, just because I listened to the truth here. What kept me coming to meetings? I never liked it. I always thought it was stupid, blah, blah, blah. But I'll tell you what kept me coming back, because for every time I sat in a meeting, I knew when I was hearing the truth. That's all I can tell you. And I think the truth no matter how much you are affected by the disease of alcoholism. You know the truth when you hear it. And if you keep coming back, you get to live the truth. And these 12 steps are the path. I live in step 3 every single day now. I ask God to help me get through the day. But I just don't want to get through it. I lived a life of getting through the day. I want to live the day. I want to see the moments. I want to have these things still continue to happen for me. I know that Butch wants them to happen for me. My husband died, but the love never does. I feel surrounded by it all the time. I wouldn't know that if I wasn't here with you guys. And I'm just going to close. I want to close with this little prayer. We had this big memorial service for Butch, and when Butch went through the hospital, he had this steno notebook, and they went through all 12 steps in this hospital program, and behind steps, 2 and 3, he had this prayer that's on this steno notebook, and my husband said this prayer every single solitary day that he was sober, and now I say it. And it's just a real simple prayer. So I had these memorial cards made up, and I tried to look up this prayer on the internet, and I couldn't find it. So now I've named it Butch's Prayer. If you ever find it, correct it to Butch's prayer, because that's what it is now. And it's really simple, but it's beautiful, and it makes me think of him. Because it's how he lived his life. It's how I want to live mine. And it says, God, I believe there is a path from wherever I am to wherever I need to go. That I will be given the light to find that path. And that I will be given the strength to follow it one day at a time. And that I will enjoy the journey and be myself when I arrive. So please don't forget to enjoy the journey, and thanks for having me.
And let's